Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obisidian Entertainment's upcoming release, AVOWED. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you guys so much for joining me on another episode today as we dive into the lore for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and that way we can kind of make some insights towards AVOWED as it undergoes development. As you know, I've been doing a character creation series recently, even though today isn't going to feature that, where I've been looking into the character creation tool from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and we've been diving into the lore for each of the things that you can select in that tool. A lot recently, I've been talking about the Pale Elves and the White That Wends, and Rymrgand comes up. And a lot of questions have been asked about Rymrgand, especially by those who have played Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, because he's kind of a central figure in the Eoran pantheon, at least from a writing perspective. But there's a lot of mystery involved around the god Rymrgand. And so I've been inspired, and I just wanted to finally get an episode like this out. I've been wanting to talk about Rymrgand, but I've also been putting him off because I want to do the lore on Rymrgand justice. But you know what? I'm just going to constantly put it off until I think I have like a perfect manuscript or something for an episode. I don't actually script my episodes, so I don't even know why I thought that. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Today we're going to dive into the lore for the god of Entropy, known as Rymrgand. There's no news about the game to go over this week anyways, but you might have noticed that the name of the podcast has changed, and I just wanted to quickly address that. Essentially, I was talking with some people about podcast development and growth because this show is coming up on a year in about a month, and one thing I've been wanting to focus on is how can I grow as a podcaster, as a content creator, what kind of things should I be doing and talking about? And one thing that me and someone who I was consulting talked about was being a little more search engine friendly, SEO kind of stuff like that. The suggestion came up about incorporating the things that my podcast is about into the title of the actual podcast itself, so it shows up in search results. I don't know why, but I resisted that idea for a while. For some reason, I thought it was like, I want to say selling out, even though it's not. And then eventually I kind of realized, I'm like, wait a second, that's stupid. Like, it's just the title of the podcast. I'm making it more accessible to people. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, I'm going forward and I'm just adding kind of a little flair at the end of it. So it's still called the World of Eora, you might notice, but I just include the Pillars of Eternity AVOWED lore on the part after that. So that's just a quick addressing of that change if you noticed it. Anyways, I don't want to keep rambling on. Let's get into the lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
Now, for those of you who haven't played Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and you're just wanting to learn about the world that AVOWED's going to be taking place in, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here. We're going to be talking about the god Rymrgand today, the god of entropy, the god of cold, the god of, famine. He's the god of a lot of things. I'm going to try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, but there are some speculations and some tinfoil hat theories about Rymrgand that I will want to include as well. So I'll give heads up on any spoilers that we might walk into. If you're not really worried about Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2's narrative, that's fine. Then feel free to listen to the entire episode. But yeah, let's dive into what Rymrgand is. Now, Rymrgand is one of the 11 deities in the world of Eora. For those who are familiar with fantasy stories and games and movies, you'll know that quite often there are a unique set of deities that exist in the world. And Rymrgand is one of the 11 unique gods that were created at Obisidian Entertainment for the purposes of this fantasy world Eora. Now, Rymrgand, also known as the Beast of Winter, which is the name of one of the DLCs for Pillars of Eternity 2, he is the god of several things, and they all kind of tie together once you really start to look at it. Rymrgand is the god of cold, winter, famine, entropy, natural disasters, bad luck, and I like this last one, the collapse of nations and empires. It's a little bit of a title. Can you imagine having to say that every time you have like a service at the Rymrgand church? Welcome one and all. Today we read from the book of the god of the collapse of nations and empires. Doesn't have quite the same ring to it as, say, the god of entropy, which is a way cooler sounding name. The Rymrgand is the god of all manifestation of erosion and collapse. He is one of the gods that represent death, kind of like Bereth and Aethys. They also represent death, but in a different way. Whereas Bereth is the god of the wheel, which is the name for the cycle of reincarnation that exists in this world. When Bereth represents death, she represents it in more of a, like, it's part of the cycle kind of way, you know? Like, Bereth's death is more about the soul being reborn into the cycle of this world, and it's kind of perpetuating that life. Aethys is the god of death in the sense that all things that come to life will eventually die, and it's just sort of like the actual act of death itself. But Rymrgahnd, he is the god of death in the sense that everything eventually dies totally, like completely. That Rymrgahnd is constantly talking about the inevitable end of everything, and he is the god of entropy for that very reason. It's not just death in the sense of like, oh, you know, the animal dies and becomes food for the soil, and then the soil eats the nutrients and makes a tree, and, you know, like the cycle of life. He's talking about like the heat death of the universe, and eventually the sun exploding, you know, like he is the finality kind of level of death. And that's a little bit more about what Rymrgahnd represents as a death god. Interestingly enough, by just reading on the Pillars of Eternity Wikipedia page, the name Rymrgahnd apparently is inspired from Old Norse and Icelandic names. So apparently there's a root word ree-myr or ree-my, which means void or space. It can also mean rhyming, like from poetry, or the word hirm, meaning rhyme or hoarfrost. And then apparently Gandr means riding animal or dangerous beast. And if you are familiar with Rymrgahnd, all of that kind of sounds familiar. Rymrgahnd has a plane of existence that he occupies, right? He doesn't spiritually or physically or, you know, he doesn't exist in the material world where you play the game or where your character would exist. He exists in his own plane of existence that's kind of adjacent to the material plane, and it's called the White Void. And so ree-myr, meaning void or space, mixed with Gandr, meaning riding animal or dangerous beast, whenever we see Rymrgahnd or we have a vision of Rymrgahnd in the game, he's taking the form of this giant aurochs, this furry ox-like animal with horns protruding out of it and frost all over. So that matches what we're seeing here. That's a cool little real-world inspiration behind Rymrgahnd. Now, if you have the Pillars of Eternity Collector's Book, you can go to page, I think at the very end of page 18, but it's mainly page 19, and you can read about Rymrgahnd. This is the official lore in the Collector's Book that was written by the writers over at Obsidian. If you don't have this book, by the way, if you purchase the Collector's Edition of Pillars of Eternity 1 on Steam, you can find it in the game files on your PC. Otherwise, I think you had to be a Kickstarter backer back before Pillars of Eternity was released. But here is what we can know about Rymrgahnd. I already said his alias is the Beast of Winter, and we've gone through his portfolio of things that he is the god of. He has no allies and no foes. He's kind of just on his own, which is, you know, pretty normal for the guy that is just talking about the inevitable end of all things. His symbol is a horned skull of an aurochs, which, again, I've already described what an aurochs is. But here is the official lore for Rymrgahnd, and I'll add some commentary as we go. Much like Andra and Bereth, Andra is another deity in the Eoran pantheon. She represents the ocean and the moon and forgetfulness and stuff like that. Much like Andra and Bereth, Rymrgahnd seems to be more ancient, primal sort of deity. Descriptions of it, or a god very much like it, appear in some of the oldest Glanfathan ruins, and therefore predate present-day civilization. There's a little theory that I have and a couple other people have about the idea that if Rymrgahnd is depicted far before the rest of the gods, even though all the gods would exist at the same time, what might that indicate? Does that indicate that Rymrgahnd is related to something more ancient than the rest of the gods? When we start diving into some spoiler territory, maybe I'll explore that a little more. The Beast of Winter takes the form of a massive, shaggy aurochs, its albino fur thickly encrusted with frost and snow. Reports of the creature's height vary, though it is commonly said to be over 30 feet tall, and sometimes much taller. Despite its size, it is often described as an emaciated creature, as though it hasn't eaten in days or weeks. Whenever I picture Rymrgahnd in my head, you know, I always picture somebody walking through a blizzard in an ice field somewhere, and the wind is howling and the snow is just blocking everything, but you can feel something shaking the earth beneath you, and you're looking around for this kind of like booming noise. And then all of a sudden, just outside the fog, you see this massive aurochs with its frost-covered fur just wandering slowly through this winter wasteland, if you will. And it kind of gives me like Shadow of the Colossus vibes, that this massive creature is just kind of uncaring about you until, you try to jump on its fur and stab it in its sensitive places. I'm sure people have tried with the god of entropy, probably to their ill will. That's what I picture. Anyways, all the reported sightings agree that Rymrgahnd maintains a constant pace, never pausing or faltering. Its appearance is often heralded by a deep, droning call that echoes from miles around. Wherever the beast steps, all life dies. No form of life is immune to Rymrgand's power, and even the gods are said to flee its passage. Rymrgahnd is also accompanied by a bitter cold that grows worse as it draws near, and the god itself is often obscured by driving snow and ice. So that just kind of drives forward the image that I was talking about here. This god of death, this god of entropy, literally destroys life just as it walks around. It's got like this aura around it that is antithetical to life. And so, if you have a plant that is just sticking out of the ground somewhere, and then the god of death walks by, the plant dies. Because, what's one plant going to do against a deity? But the idea that Rymrgahnd just promotes death and decay and entropy everywhere it goes is very consistent with what people are saying the beast of winter is like when it walks around in a manifested form. And so these are all kind of legends, I guess, technically speaking, but it is the official lore written from people at Obsidian. I like this entry here that says even the gods are said to flee from the passage of this giant aurochs. There's something about Rymrgahnd that is very powerful that the gods themselves might even kind of try to stay away from. Perhaps Rymrgahnd reminds them that the world will end one day, and perhaps they will no longer exist one day, despite the fact that they're deities and they probably like to think they live forever. These fantasy deities are a lot like other fantasy deities in the sense that like they have a history and they have origins and stuff like that, just like a lot of the gods in other mythologies, for example. So Rymrgahnd is probably a constant reminder to them that one day they will no longer exist. And this is something that Rymrgahnd has kind of come to accept and that his followers actually think of as a good thing. It's just the natural progression of reality. Anyways, returning back to the book. Witnesses, at least those lucky enough to get close to Rymrgahnd and survive, also report seeing figures hiding amid the thick fur of its underside. These are believed to be the souls of those who ventured too near to the beast. Their mortal bodies were frozen and are long since gone, but their souls cling to the god's bushy coat, desperately seeking shelter from the cold. The dwarves of the boreal south have stories of heroes who have tried to save the souls of their loved ones from this fate, though such stories typically have tragic ends. So the soul mechanics in the World of Eora, if you're not familiar, are essentially that you have a body, it's a unique body in time, and you have a soul. That soul is made up of essence, capital E essence. Kind of like your body's made up of carbon, your soul is made up of essence. And it's the unique mingling of soul and body that create the person that you are. Because your soul actually enters into this cycle of reincarnation known as the wheel, which I've mentioned already. So when your body dies, your soul will go away to where the gods are and then come back to the mundane world and enter into a new body and therefore have a new person. And this one part in the book here is describing how a person's body died when they got too close to the beast of winter as it wandered through a snow and ice wasteland. But the soul itself stayed within the bushy fur of this aurochs as it wanders through the world. Some believe that Rymrgahnd follows a migratory path from south to north, bringing winter cold from the polar region as it makes its way north, and then allowing the warmth of spring to return when it heads south once more. The discovery of a similar polar region in the far north, as well as the reports of the beast of winter among peoples there, have cast doubt upon these ancient superstitions, though it is possible that Rymrgahnd has multiple manifestations. This is kind of the origins for a mythological understanding of where seasons might come from. So as Rymrgand's titanic form wanders the globe of Eora, he creates basically winter everywhere he goes. But then, as he leaves an area, life starts to spring up again, and that's where spring and summer comes from. And then he starts to approach, and it turns back to fall and goes into winter. So Rymrgand's wanderings would create the seasons in the world. Sightings and visions of the beast are thought to be portents of bad luck or impending doom, often appearing in the dreams of leaders before disaster strikes their people. The aurochs' skull is a near-universal symbol of doom. Bereth and Rymrgahnd share a complicated relationship within the divine pantheon. Though both figures lord over death, Bereth is viewed as having dominion over death's cycle, while Rymrgahnd is the master of entropy. Some theologians believe Rymrgahnd would prefer the cycle dismantled. The souls who take part in it disintegrated. This oppositional standpoint is reflected in Rymrgand's worshippers, who view their resurrections as punishments instead of blessings. And that is true. The Pale Elves of the world of Eora that live in a location known as the White That Wends, which is basically just Antarctica, the Pale Elves almost universally follow and worship the god Rymrgand, and they do not like the idea of the wheel, this cycle of reincarnation. They do not like the idea that when they die, their soul enters into this cycle that just essentially spits them back out into a new body, and that just keeps going on and on. They worship the god Rymrgand, who looks forward to the ending of all things, the unraveling and the entropy of all things. And so to them, this idea of the wheel, this cycle of reincarnation, is perverse. It's an abomination, and it's something that they actively would like to oppose, although they don't really have a lot of means to do so, technically speaking. And this brings forward some really interesting ideas about Rymrgand as an entity that I like to stop and take a look at. So Rymrgand, as I've mentioned, represents entropy, and he represents the unraveling and decay of all things. And how does it actually play out in the world of Eora? Well, as I've mentioned, he has a plane of existence known as the White Void. When some people die in the world, their souls, as I said, they leave the body from the recently deceased body, and the souls will go to where the gods are. Some souls will go to where Bareth is, some souls will go to where Aethys is, or what have you. But some souls will go to Rymrgand's domain, the White Void. And in the White Void, the souls there, they're walking around in their essential form, capital E essential, and the winds of the White Void actually wear away at the souls, and that is what is called entropy in this world, at least from a soul mechanics kind of perspective. And so you have a fracturing and a fragmenting of these souls, because these souls enter the White Void and they're wandering around, and just the White Void as it is, the White Void being its natural phenomenon that it is, wears down souls to the point that eventually they are not really whole souls anymore. And those souls, if they do return back to the world, I don't know if they ever do leave the White Void, I can't remember for sure, but souls that like wear down like that, if they do go back to Eora, that is why some people in the world have soul maladies, like a fractured personality, or they have some sort of mental disorder, or they have memory lapses or something like that. It's usually some sort of consciousness ailment. Now, for the souls that are trapped in the White Void, eventually the winds will wear down the souls to the point that they just go into oblivion. They don't exist anymore. They get worn down to a powder and blown away into the White Void's winds. Not that the White Void has winds, I guess, but technically when you enter into it in a game DLC, you can, I guess it's like showed to you in a way that your character can understand. So regardless of whether or not it's metaphorical or not, that's how it's played in the game. This White Void is the home of the Beast of Winter, which is where you can actually find this giant aurochs wandering around. You have all these souls that are being worn down by entropy. Now, this makes something interesting here, because if this is something that the god of entropy is promoting in the world, if this is something that he is working towards, his end goal is the unraveling and decay of all things, there's one thing that he does that I don't understand why he does. And that is that whenever a pale elf dies, which is kind of like his people, whenever a pale elf dies, that soul goes to the White Void, where Rymrgand is. He, in a sense, protects them from entropy, and then sends those souls back into another pale elf body in the White That Wends, which is kind of his physical domain. And I'm not really sure why, because this actually would seem like it goes against the things that he believes in, or the things that he represents as a deity, right? He's protecting souls from the entropy. He's, causing this wheel of reincarnation to continuously happen where the souls of his people are surviving longer. Isn't that going against what he thinks of regarding the inevitable end of all things? Now, to be fair, maybe he has a reason he's doing it. Like maybe he's trying to perpetuate the souls of his people who will go out in the world and perpetuate his mission for the world of Eora. And he knows that the world will eventually end one day, and that actually it'll go quicker if he sends his champions out in the world to do it for him. Whereas if he just left things to their own devices, it would take longer. So perhaps he's trying to hasten it. But I also don't get the feeling that Rymrgand cares how long it takes. The world's going to end eventually. So maybe he has some personal goal in mind, something that he just wants to get accomplished because, he's only got so much time to exist, so he may as well do something he wants to do. I don't know. I feel that being a follower of Rymrgand, it would be so weird. I have a hard time placing my worldview there of this idea of worshiping a god that looks forward to the ending of all things, like the true ending of all things, not like the universe will die, but I will make sure that you survive, dear children, into the next one or something. Like the idea seems to be that eventually everything is just going to, like the heat death of the universe that we know of, it's just everything stops. There's just no more energy. Everything just dies. The idea that you're looking forward to that, this is a hard place to put yourself into. And I find looking at these cults of Rymrgand, Rymrgandians, as I like to lovingly call them, like they worship the Beast of Winter and they rejoice at the ending of all things, this unraveling and this decay that exists. You can actually see in more than just the unraveling of these souls, you can actually see this in some more concrete ways. So for example, there is a race of creature that exists in the world of Eora called godlike. A godlike creature is like any other of the races that you see in Eora, whether it's a human, a dwarf, an elf, or an Amauan or an Orlin. Those are the main races that you see in the world. A godlike is usually a person who is a child of one of those normal races, but they are blessed by one of the gods when they're in the womb. And if you're blessed by, let's say, the god of nature, you are going to become what's called a nature godlike, right? So you'll have the same kind of physical silhouette of your parents. Like if you have elven parents, you'll grow up to have an elven silhouette, but you'll have a different external physiological form in the sense of if you're a nature godlike, you might have moss growing on your skin or fungus growing out of your body. You might have vines for hair. You might have goat hooves for feet, might have antlers growing out of your head, So it's kind of a physical external thing. It's a physiological thing. And I've done an episode on godlikes before, so if you want to learn more about the godlike race, you can go ahead and check it out. But if you are a child in the womb of normal kith parents and the god Rymrgand blesses you, you become what's known as an ending godlike. Now, what you look like is best represented by a character in Pillars of Eternity 2 in the Beast of Winter DLC known as Vatnir. Vatnir is the only endings godlike that we can actually interact with and see. Vatnir, he has got like pale, dead-looking skin. I mean, he is technically a pale elf person. His parents were pale elves, so that might just be that. But I'm also guessing that endings godlikes have skin that look like that of someone who is either frozen or suffering from extreme hypothermia or just dead altogether. And granted, you can't actually see all of Vatnir's skin, maybe not a lot of it, because endings godlikes, at least represented by this NPC Vatnir, I think they're constantly falling apart. When you look at Vatnir, he has bandages over his face, and he looks like he has like this like bone faceplate, which I'm guessing is literally holding his face together because, he's a person representing the god of entropy and decay and death. And so it makes sense that this godlike in the form or the image of Rymrgand would also just be decaying himself. He has these like giant horns that are protruding and going back behind his head, kind of like an aurochs. It looks like he doesn't even have lips. It looks like his teeth or the bottom half of his teeth are just showing, and I don't see any sign of lips or anything there. Like it's almost like his own flesh is actually just disintegrating as he exists. And apparently in the game he protrudes a little aura that produces sickness or something with people around him. I don't remember if that actually happens in the game, but I remember reading it in the lore somewhere that people around this guy just tend to get sick and slowly decay, and the world around him like kind of dies, Almost like how the Beast of Winter, Rymrgand, would walk around and plant life around him would immediately die. Well, these endings godlike, which are in the image of Rymrgand and kind of have a magical aura about them, would probably do the same thing, just on a smaller scale. Right, so like you can see this idea of decay in even the endings godlike, and it's not just physical decay as well, and it's not just spiritual decay of the souls. It's probably the decay of everything. I mean, he is the god of what was that long, lovely title that I loved? It was the collapse of nations and empires, and that's more of a societal decay. That's more of a social decay, and so decay in any sense of the word is tied to Rymrgand, and so there's a lot of different ways that a life of worship towards Rymrgand could permeate. Does that mean that you would try to promote negative social interactions with people? Would you try to destroy the positive and growth-oriented relationships in your life? I don't know. Because you're wanting to try to worship the god Rymrgand in everything you do, right? If you're worshiping and following this god. But how does that look when it comes to things like having friends or having a family that grows or something like that, right? Like these pale elves, they all universally basically worship this god, but they're also clearly trying to stay alive in this frozen hostile wasteland. I don't know how to make sense of that. Now, while we're on the topic of people following Rymrgahnd as a deity, there is a lore book in Pillars of Eternity 1, which I guess you could consider scripture, if you will, right? So there is a book called The Enigmatic God of Cold, and it's a book you can find in Pillars of Eternity, and it's about the deity Rymrgahnd. I don't know if it's actually considered scripture for people that follow Rymrgahnd, but it tells us the most we can about it, and you will often find it as lootable items in areas where worshippers of Rymrgahnd are, or in libraries, obviously enough, because it's a book. So I want to read this piece of Rymrgahdian scripture to you, and we'll give comments as we go. Young students are often confused by Bareth and Rymrgand's seemingly overlapping roles in holding dominion over death. Bareth oversees the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Rymrgahnd oversees the cold, destructive act of death itself. This difference is often difficult for novices to appreciate until they've lost a loved one and endured the absence for a time. It is Bareth that determines we will be reborn just as certainly as we will die, but Rymrgahnd is the executioner's axe. Rymrgahnd shows us that all life ends in stillness. I need only show them the symbol of Rymrgahnd, the bone-white aurochs skull found carved within most ancient of Engwithan ruins. It is a symbol of death and doom in every culture. Any child with 4 winters under his belt needs no introduction to the ancient symbol. Just here in the first couple paragraphs, we're seeing the relationship between Rymrgahnd being a different kind of death god than the other ones, especially Bareth. Like, Rymrgahnd is described as the executioner's axe, while Bareth is the act of death and rebirth kind of thing. Just the symbol alone of Rymrgahnd is enough to instill, the feeling of doom amongst people. Returning back to the scripture, Rymrgahnd embodies not just death, but all manifestations of collapse. Be they famine, plague, or simple bad luck, Rymrgahnd is a primal god, silent and inscrutable as death itself. He makes himself known with his passing, not by proclamation. There are innumerable stories of the god's terrifying passage through the lands of Eora. When the beast of winter stirs, bitter winds and beastly howling follow the creature's every move. Wherever the beast plants a hoof, all life withers into dust. The faithful of Rymrgahnd insist that even another god's life can end in stillness. They claim the other gods must flee from the beast of winter's mastery over death, but we know not if this boast holds true. Though the beast of winter is shrouded in snowy clouds, those who have seen the shaggy white monster claim that the souls of the fallen can be seen clinging, or perhaps frozen, to the beast's fur. The dwarves of the boreal south have numerous stories that tell a similar plot. A brash hero seeks out the beast of winter to rescue the souls trapped in its fur. These tales never end well, for even if the hero saves his beloved soul, the hero dies in the process. For it is not a proper tale of Rymrgahnd unless the hero's life ends in stillness. So there you have it. That's the kind of the scripture, if you will, for Rymrgahdian worshippers. And as we can see here, it ends in stillness. Everything with Rymrgahnd just ends in everything becoming still, and without any motion, there is no life, and there isn't even like the hope for life, right? If everything is absolutely still, then nothing is happening. That means it's the final image of all things once everything becomes still. And that is something that Rymrgahnd apparently just slowly trudges towards, one step at a time in his bestial form. And then one day, even he, I suppose, will just remain still. Maybe he'll be the last thing to remain still, who knows. Now, before we close off talking about Rymrgahnd, the god of entropy, I'm going to go through some items that we find in the game that have lore about Rymrgahnd in them. So, in many games, just like in Pillars of Eternity, there are item descriptions that you can find attached to certain things, right? So if you've played Bloodborne, then you can look at item descriptions of weapons you find, and it gives you a little bit of lore about the world. To give a different example, Destiny does the same thing, where if you look at the armor sets and the weapon sets that you collect in the game, you actually can learn a lot about the lore of that game and the world just by reading armor set and weapon set descriptions. And Pillars of Eternity is no different. So, for example, we can learn the story of Ree-myr, a wizard from the White That Wins, by looking at this, what is this? By looking at this quarterstaff known as the Wendwalker. So this quarterstaff Wendwalker, it goes as such. Ree-myr was a wizard from the White That Wins. Later in life, he developed an obsession with Rymrgahnd, convinced that if he could see the great aurochs with his own eyes, the mysteries of creation and destruction would become clear to him. He wandered the frozen continent for decades with little more than his quarterstaff, Wendwalker, and his sealskin coat, chasing the rumors of Glomfellan tribes and the death-cold gales that swept the glaciers. A migrating tribe eventually came upon Wendwalker, planted in the snow and pointing to the sky. There was no sign of Ismar, but the legend spread that he had found Rymrgahnd and now follows in the shadow of the mighty beast. This description seemingly doesn't have any new lore that we're talking about, but this is where the lore comes from, where the idea that the Beast of Winter actually wanders the white that wends, right? The idea that if you were walking around in this Eoran Antarctica, that you could theoretically walk into or walk near this giant wandering aurochs that is Rymrgahnd. It's a cool idea if you want to do a tabletop role-playing game in the World of Eora, and you set it in the white that wends. Perhaps, maybe, just maybe, your characters get a glimpse of a giant aurochs in the distance, which, for those who are aware of what that means, might freak out a little bit. I don't know. The other item that I want to talk about is called Melina's Boots, and this is a description for those boots. Melina was born to Glomfellan travelers in the Dyrwood. Glomfellan are the name of the Pale Elves, and they're apparently up in the Dyrwood, which is really far north from where their homeland is, but whatever. So Melina is a Pale Elf up in the Dyrwood traveling, but returned to her ancestral village in the White That Wends after her parents passed away. When a migratory clan stopped in her village, the elder son tried to defile her, and she blinded him with a torch. Knowing the young man would rally his friends to hunt her down, and that her own village could offer little protection, Melina fled, but got hopelessly lost in the midst of a snowstorm. Frightened, hungry, and knowing the hunters were close behind, she came across a pool in the shape of a giant hoof print, filled with a liquid that shimmered like ice. Muttering a prayer to Rymrgahnd, she dipped her boots into it, and the strange substance infused her boots with a magic that hastened her escape and erased her tracks. Hoping to start a new life, Melina traveled to Erglonfoth, which is further north, kind of where the Dyrwood is. 2 months later, only to be killed by an Orlin Brishalgwyn in the War of Black Trees. The boots are made of rough, reddish-brown leather. The left side of the boot is branded with a stylized image of a walrus. So here we see this person who apparently, you can surmise, came across a hoof print of the aurochs of the Beast of Winter himself. And that by dipping these boots into the liquid that was still in there, it gave her boots an increased ability to make her quicker and also harder to detect. Which makes sense because it does actually give you an increase into your speed, although it doesn't say anything about making it harder for people to detect you, because in the lore for this, it says that the boots got rid of the footprints as she went through. But interestingly enough, it says that after she traveled to start a new life further north, a little more central in the world, that she was killed by someone else. Again, fitting of any story involving Rymrgahnd, it ends with the hero of the story, the protagonist, kind of ending in stillness. So that is actually all the lore that I have on Rymrgahnd, at least the lore that I wish to talk about right now. We discussed Rymrgahnd in terms of the aliases, the portfolio of domains they have, a bit of their symbology and their worship and what they represent, this idea of decay and all that. And we took a look at the scripture as well as a couple of items that are kind of ancillary to the lore surrounding Rymrgahnd. Now, before I end this episode, I do want to take a quick moment to do some kind of like tinfoil hat theories about Rymrgahnd, which I think as of lately I've kind of second guessing myself on some of this, but I do like to speculate. And so I'm going to wildly do so right now, and I'm going to share it with you guys. As I mentioned in the lore before, if you remember me saying it, there is descriptions of symbology regarding Rymrgahnd that predates symbology of the other gods. Specifically, there are pre-Ingwithan ruins that exist in caves and places like that, and the symbols representing Rymrgahnd, at least as we know him now, exist before the other iconography that we see. And so the idea there is that it sounds like this conception of Rymrgahnd existed before the other gods, but that wouldn't make sense because according to the history of the gods, which you can learn about in another episode, also it's full of spoilers, so I don't want to put too much of it here. Learning a history about the gods, like they've all existed simultaneously together at the same time. So the idea that Rymrgahnd existed beforehand doesn't really quite make sense. Like, why would that be? It might just be that his symbol was one of the first ones that were written down, and perhaps that it's not actually he is older than the rest of the gods, but there definitely is parts in the lore and parts in interactions with NPCs in the game that it is the opinion of a lot of people, including in-game historians, that Rymrgahnd is the oldest of the deities. And that idea brings forth a lot of questions, especially since the deities are supposed to be the same age. If Rymrgahnd is older, how is that possible? How is it possible that this deity that would have existed at the same time as the others be older? And my personal theory is that the god Rymrgahnd, as they know them today in Pillars of Eternity, is actually a god that interacted with something much older. This is where I'm going to get into spoilers, so if you want to avoid major narrative spoilers for Pillars of Eternity 1, I would say skip ahead. But yeah, skip ahead for 2 minutes. As I said, and this is a second warning because this is a big one, these are major spoilers that I'm about to dive into for Pillars of Eternity 1. And it does spoil this for you at the start of Pillars of Eternity 2, but yeah, major spoilers for Pillars of Eternity 1. So the gods, at least the ones we know about in the world of Eora when you're playing the game, are not the result of like normal Greek mythology or Sumerian god mythology or anything like that. It is the result of the work of Kith people in the world. The Kith creatures being elves, humans, dwarves, Amauans, and Orlans. So regular people in the world, way back when, they existed in the Ingwithan society. And the Ingwithans were tired of seeing all these religious wars that were being perpetuated within the world, so they decided they were going to seek out the creators of the very universe itself. Except apparently they found nothing, right? Now, whether or not they actually found nothing, or whether or not there were creators of the universe, so that they were just hiding their existence, it doesn't change the fact that the Ingwithans came to the conclusion that there were no creators of the universe, that there was nothing behind the veil. There was nothing there, right? And so with this conclusion in mind, they set out to do what's called the Apotheosis Project. And they essentially sacrificed their own people and used all of that soul energy of their civilization to craft the 11 gods that we see in the world of Eora, Rymrgahnd being one of them. And so Rymrgahnd is actually just the creation of the Ingwithan society. And this is the reason for the Ingwithans' extinction by the time Pillars of Eternity comes around. That is a lot of lore glossed over very quickly, and it's like the major spoiler for Pillars of Eternity 1, so hopefully you didn't catch any of that, if that's what you were trying to avoid. I did give you lots of warning. And so that is the justification for why Rymrgahnd is the same age as all the other deities from the Ingwithan pantheon. Now, with that in mind, it begs the question, why would Rymrgahnd be considered older? And here is what I think, that when Rymrgahnd interacted with something that truly is older, even if the Ingwithans didn't necessarily know about it, but he did interact with something that truly is older, something that is like the creator of the world, or something that predates the existence of anything else in reality. And this thing, it might not have even been sentient. It might not have even been like a god or a deity or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that, but he interacted with it, and his deific form took after that thing. And the reason that I think this is because the White Void, his plane of existence, is something that I think already existed beforehand. I don't think he created the White Void as a place to live. I think that the White Void was kind of already a thing. I don't think it physically exists the way you see it in the game. I think that's just a visual way that the game developers made it for your character. But I think that the White Void as a thing already existed before the gods were making their own planes of existence. The reason I think this is because if you are playing Pillars of Eternity 2 and you go to the White Void as part of the DLC, if you pay attention to the screen, you'll notice that it looks like Adra pillars are coming down from above the screen, which to me infers that you are actually at the root system of this Adra pillar. And as a quick backup for those wondering what Adra is, when you play Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, there are these giant jade-like pillars coming out of the ground. These are the Pillars of Eternity that are referenced in the title of the game. And they essentially are conduits for souls. Well, they can be conduits for souls. They can pass soul energy through them, kind of like copper wire can with electricity. The idea is, at least this is a theory, is that when a soul dies, it goes to one of these Adra pillars, and then it descends into the Adra pillars to where the gods are. And here we are in the White Void, and we're in this plane of existence, and we can see Adra pillars coming down into this area. And so does that mean that this place already existed? Because we see Adra pillars, which come from the physical world, down into this place. Maybe that suggests that Adra is some sort of transcendent material, that it exists in multiple forms at the same time. Like, we're getting into some crazy theories when we start talking about that. But I have this inkling that the white void already exists, that this idea of soul entropy was already existing and going on beforehand, and that when Rymrgand, he just took that place as his own. He just naturally fit in there. That's where he lived. So he just took up residence there. And he took up the mantle of this god of entropy, even though perhaps something like that already existed in the first place. The reason that I'm interested in this theory is because it indicates that there might have been something else that existed before the gods of Eora. But again, there's nothing to indicate that would be true, but there's nothing to indicate it would be false either. I would like to think that it's like a capital N nothing, that capital N nothing existed beforehand, which I guess technically would be true, but I don't know how you could conceptualize that into an existential thing. Anyways, I'm getting way too far into this tinfoil hat theory. You want to talk about more with me, please email me. I'll give all my contact info at the end of this episode where you can lambaste me for all the reasons that this theory might be wrong. But that is my personal theory. Now, what is the impact of Rymrgand going to be on AVOWED? That's the thing that I think a lot of us might be thinking about as we're hyped up for this game coming into release. There's nothing specifically that we see in the trailer right now, and we don't have any other information that came out, either in leaks from different sources or whatnot, or officially from Obsidian. So there's nothing about Rymrgand specifically. But Rymrgand is one of the most interesting deities for sure. The entire DLC, Beast of Winter, is named after the god Rymrgand. And there's so much lore in that DLC that brings into question a lot about the fabric of the world of Eora and a lot about the god's existence and all that kind of stuff. And so Rymrgand to me is one of the most interesting gods. If you want to learn more about the history of the world and the metaphysical foundations for how this fantasy world exists, Rymrgand is a god to pay attention to, in my opinion. And so, when AVOWED releases, if you have the opportunity to dive into a cult of Rymrgand, or you have the opportunity to go and read lore or books that have to do with Rymrgand, I would pay attention to that. I know I will. I know I'll probably be playing as a pale elf in my first playthrough, assuming we get to choose all that kind of stuff. And I am going to try to seek out Rymrgandian lore in this world, specifically to see if I can connect dots from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 to AVOWED, maybe learn something about the very history of the world's origins itself. I'm very hopeful and very optimistic about it, but it might not actually see the light of day. Either way, it's still going to be a fun playthrough. And that is everything about the god Rymrgand. Guys, thanks so much for sticking with me on this episode where I kind of ranted and raved for a while. I'm sorry, just Rymrgand is so interesting to me. I love this deity. I love the writing that they did around him. I love the mystery and the intrigue that is going on behind the scenes of everything. But yeah, so thanks again, guys, for sticking with me on that. If you'd like to reach me, you can email me, worldofeora@gmail.com, or find me on Twitter @worldofeora. I'm also on Reddit personally, the username Gingerino. Those are all different ways that you can get in contact with me. I love having conversations about this world. I love having people asking me questions. I also like even being corrected because, I'm going to make a mistake every now and then. I'm sure of it. I try to do as much research as I can, but it's nice to have people out there that can be like, actually, I think maybe this is a little more accurate. And then awesome. Thank you for that. And then I could put that on the show. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.